we'll end the discussion on World War II Part 3 in the Pacific. So anyway, this is World War II Part 2, Early Troubles for the Allies and the End of World War II in Europe. And our first subtopic is Allied Disasters in the Pacific. Allied disasters in the Pacific. Because the reason we're starting here is because we just came off of Pearl Harbor. Okay? Just came off of Pearl Harbor. Well, immediately after the events of Pearl Harbor, Japanese troops advanced rapidly in the Pacific Ocean. And there were three notable areas that the Japanese concentrated on after attacking Pearl Harbor. Areas that they wanted to control. So immediately after the events of Pearl Harbor, Japanese troops advanced rapidly in the Pacific Ocean in these three notable areas. First of all, they advanced to the Philippine Islands. And you have a handout I gave you on the Philippine Islands if you're interested in that area. So they advanced upon the Philippine Islands. They also advanced on the island of Guam. G-U-A-M. Guam. G-U-A-M. And they also focused in on America to a point by focusing in on the two most eastern islands in Alaska that are called what? The Aleutian Islands. So immediately after the events of Pearl Harbor, Japanese troops advanced rapidly in the Pacific Ocean. The most notable areas they advanced to were the Philippine Islands, the island of Guam, and the two most eastern islands in Alaska, the Aleutian Islands. And they really moved into the Philippines with these, and the island of Guam with these, and the two most eastern islands, the Aleutian Islands, with pretty good ease. But there were two areas that they were having trouble taking, that they really wanted. One was the Bataan Peninsula, and an island fortress called Corregidor, which you have a map of that particular island that I handed out. So the Japanese moved with ease early in the Pacific, with the exception of two areas within the Philippine Islands, the Bataan Peninsula and the island fortress of Corregidor. Those were two areas they would have difficulty taking. And the reason that they're going to have trouble taking Bataan and Corregidor is because there are 20,000 American soldiers and 60,000 Filipino soldiers fighting to defend both of those areas. So as the Japanese run through the Pacific of the Philippines and Guam and the Aleutian Islands, they're facing resistance in both Bataan and Corregidor because of the fact there were 20,000 American troops stationed there and 60,000 Filipino soldiers. And they were fighting hard in both areas to make sure the Japanese did not take those pieces of land. Now, these Filipino soldiers that are fighting with the Americans there are under Allied command. Anybody know who the overall Allied commander was in the Pacific Ocean? American General Douglas MacArthur. So the Allied troops were under the command of American General Douglas MacArthur. And we'll talk a lot more about General MacArthur later. So here are 20,000 American troops, 60,000 Filipino soldiers fighting their butts off to try to keep the Japanese from taking Bataan and Corregidor. And they're under the command of General Douglas MacArthur. And unfortunately, they're very outmanned. They're kind of in trouble. And MacArthur's objective wasn't to defeat the Japanese here. He was just trying to hold on to those two areas until reinforcements arrived. That was his goal. They were vastly outnumbered in those two areas. And so his objective at Bataan and Corregidor were simply to hold the two areas, not give them up to the Japanese until reinforcements arrived, which he expected at any time. What was the problem? What's that? They didn't get there. And it got so ugly in those two areas that President Roosevelt, not wanting his Allied commander killed there, ordered MacArthur to flee to Australia. So it got so bad in Bataan and Corregidor that President Roosevelt gave a direct order to General MacArthur that he was to flee that area and head for the safety of Australia. Now, I don't know how much you're into history or how much you know about history, but where is Corregidor and Bataan? They're in the Philippine Islands. And before MacArthur departed or abandoned the Philippines and abandoned their citizens and abandoned both American and Filipino troops, he was not overly thrilled that he had to leave, and he vowed, "I shall return." If you've ever heard that quote, that's where it came from. So MacArthur was very reluctant to abandon his troops and the citizens and the Filipino soldiers, but he had been given a direct order from the President of the United States to get out of there for his safety and go to Australia. So as he left the Philippines, he vowed, "I shall return." Well, prior to leaving, General MacArthur ordered Major General Jonathan Wainwright to defend the Bataan Peninsula without surrender. He ordered Major General Jonathan Wainwright, that was kind of the guy that was in command right under MacArthur, he ordered him to hold Bataan, and you hold Corregidor without surrender. I will return, I shall return. And Wainwright, who was incredibly loyal to MacArthur, and his men, along with those Filipinos, fought gallantly to hold Bataan. Fought gallantly. They fought so hard they earned the nickname the Battling Bastards of Bataan. They fought their rear ends off to try to hold that area until MacArthur came back with reinforcements. So General Wainwright and his men fought gallantly to hold Bataan, even earning the nickname the Battling Bastards of Bataan. Well, on May 6th of 1942, after facing overwhelming odds, General Wainwright's forces were forced to surrender both Bataan and the island of Corregidor. So on May 6th, 1942, after facing overwhelming odds, General Wainwright's forces were forced to surrender both Bataan and the island of Corregidor. At the time, there were about 75,000 American and Filipino soldiers there. What happened to them when they surrendered? They were taken prisoner of war. So as soon as the surrender to the Japanese occurred, those approximate 75,000 American and Filipino soldiers that were still in Bataan or Corregidor were taken prisoner of war. And they were treated horribly, incredibly cruel. Many starved to death. Many starved to death. Now, I'll give you a little foresight. MacArthur is going to return later in the war, and we'll talk about that. But by that time, approximately 25,000 of those 75,000 soldiers either died from starvation or the brutal treatment they received while being a prisoner of war. It was a horrible situation. Now, has anybody heard of the Death March of Bataan, where they marched these soldiers? And if you were a survivor of the Bataan Death March, that's where they basically they marched them to their death. You were quite a hero. Now, this is off topic, but they built a brand new middle school in Billings. Anybody know what the name of the middle school is? You watch the Billings News? You know what the name is? Just open it up this year at a big ceremony. And Ben Steele was named after. So the chant at that school is, "We are," and the kids chant, "Like Steele." We are like Steele. Ben Steele died about a year ago, less than a year ago, in his 90s, a survivor of the Bataan Death March. A survivor. That's what the school was. That's who the school was named after, because of his heroics. He was from Billings. and survived the Bataan death march. If you're interested in that, you should Google it or look up the Billings and said it's a great story. Okay, that'll take us then to our next subtopic, which is stopping the Japanese advance. All of a sudden, the Japanese are taking over the Philippines and Guam and the Aleutian Islands, and now they've taken Bataan and Corregidor. And we've got to stop this Japanese advance. Now, why are they grabbing all these islands away from the Japanese homeland? Why are they grabbing all these islands? What's that? For military bases and their airplanes. And they want to keep the war away from what? Their homeland. So they are trying to gain as much territory as they can in the Pacific Ocean, these islands, so they can, as Siobhan said, set up military bases and airfields, and they want to keep the war away from their homeland. They do not want an American or Allied invasion of the coastland of Japan. So the Japanese strategy in the Pacific theater was to establish a defense area away from their homeland. This would keep American bombers from having access to or harming their country. Now, once they built this defense line and took all these islands they were interested in taking, they were then going to prepare assaults on Australia, Hawaii, and what else? That would really, the Pacific coast of the United States. So the strategy is for the Japanese to gain all these islands in the Pacific, to set up military bases and airfields, and once they get these defense lines set up away from the mother country, then they plan to attack Australia, Hawaii, and the Pacific coast of the United States. That's their plan. Well, two islands that they wanted to set up this defense line were the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. They were both islands in the Pacific Ocean that the Japanese wanted badly. The Solomon Islands and New Guinea. And they were on the way to which of those three areas? Where are the Solomon Islands and New Guinea fairly close to? Of those three areas they were going to attack. Australia. So they want the Solomon Islands and they want New Guinea so they can get established there and then make a mainland attack upon Australia. Okay? So, on May 7th and 8th of 1942, the Allies met Japan in what's known as the Battle of the Coral Sea. May 7th and 8th, 1942, Japan was advancing towards the Solomon Islands and New Guinea, and they were met by Allied forces in a battle called the Battle of the Coral Sea, which was just off the northeastern coast of Australia. So on May 7th and 8th, 1942, Japan advances, and they are met with Allied forces and fought in the Battle of the Coral Sea, which was off the northeastern shore of Australia. And this entire conflict was an air battle that was fought by planes that were stationed at one time on what? What do planes land on the ocean? Aircraft carriers. Now these aircraft carriers were so far away from each other, they couldn't even see each other. But the planes from those aircraft carriers were coming off on both sides and battling off the northeastern shore of Australia in the Battle of the Coral Sea. So the entire conflict was an air battle fought by planes from aircraft carriers from both sides that they were so far away they didn't even see each other. Now, this is one of those battles, the Battle of the Coral Sea, in which both sides claimed victory. Both sides claimed victory. Now, try not to be biased, and I'm going to give you the reason why both sides claimed victory, and then you tell me whether you think who has the best argument. Okay? Both sides are claiming victory. The United States claims victory because they stopped Japan's advance to Australia. Okay? They claim victory because they stopped Japan's advance to Australia. Was that the goal? Who's on the offensive in this deal, by the way? Japan. Who's on the defensive? The Allies. Okay? Well, the Japanese and Admiral Yamamoto claimed victory because they lost less airplanes than the United States did. So, Japanese Admiral Yamamoto claimed that the Japanese won the Battle of the Coral Sea because Japan lost less airplanes than the United States during the battle. Now, he actually has a legitimate point. What do you think that might be? I would say probably Americans won the battle because they didn't end up taking Australia. But why was it important that the Japanese lost less airplanes than the United States in any battles? And we had what in the United States going big time? Manufacturing and factories. Great big country making lots of airplanes. So we could afford to lose airplanes much faster than the Japanese. So that was his purpose. Well, we really won because we lost less airplanes than they did, and it takes us longer to make them. Whatever. What it did in end is it stopped the Japanese advance to Australia. Okay, that'll take us to our next subtopic then, which was the Battle of Midway. Battle of Midway. And this again was a battle to save what? Save which of those areas? Australia. Okay? Battle of Midway. That happened on June 3rd through the 6th, 1942. June 3rd through the 6th, 1942. And in this particular battle, American fleets defeated Japanese fleets at the Battle of Midway. And this battle, as I mentioned, the Japanese suffered a decisive defeat. There was no question that the Allies won, and the Allies basically in this battle were the United States. That's who they were fighting. Now, the American fleet in the Pacific at the Battle of Midway was under the command of two admirals, Raymond Spruance and Frank Fletcher. They were the two American admirals that controlled the American strategy in the Battle of Midway. The American fleet was under the command of Admirals Raymond Spruance and Frank Fletcher. Are the Americans on the offensive or defensive in this battle?
Offense.
Well, they're still on the defense because they're protecting Australia. Okay? Now, in this particular battle, the Americans destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. 4, compared to the United States losing 0. Now that was huge because the Japanese were not able to replace their destroyed ships as fast as the United States could replace theirs either. So this was a really big victory for the United States in the Battle of Midway because they took out 4 Japanese destroyers. Now, for the first time in the Pacific, after the victory by the Allies in the Battle of Midway, who starts on the offensive and who's on the defensive? The Allies start on the offensive end of things, and now Japan will end up fighting on the defensive end of things. So after the victory by the Allies at the Battle of Midway, Japanese Admiral Yamamoto is forced to go on the defensive, and the Allies start on the offensive for the first time in the Pacific theater of the war. So that gives you a little opening to the Pacific theater. We're going to come back to that later. Now what we're going to do is we're going to concentrate on our next subtopic, which is the war in Europe. Now, President Roosevelt had a strategy, kiddos, because his concentration, his main objective, his #1 goal was not the war in the Pacific. He wanted to defeat Germany in Europe. And he had to get the Pacific under control. He had to get the Allies on the offensive in order to start his goal of getting after Germany in Europe. So that's why we kind of talked about the European theater first, the Pacific theater first, because Roosevelt had to do what he could do to get those Japanese knocked back and on the defensive so that he could now concentrate on the war in Europe. Because he saw that as his #1 objective, the defeat of Germany. He thought if they defeated Germany in Europe, Japan would go away easily. That was his thought. We'll see if that's true. Well, you've heard of this before. By 1942, what organization had control of most of Europe? The Nazis. Okay, German Nazis under the control of Adolf Hitler. So by 1942, the German Nazis had control over most of Europe. Now, President Roosevelt also knew that Germany had a lot of good resources in both raw materials and industry. They weren't like Japan. They were able to produce goods. And he thought if we let Germany dig in Europe, they're going to be nearly impossible to defeat. If we let them get their factories organized and their industry organized, and we just kind of sit around and wait, they're going to get dug in, and we're never going to dig them out, never going to get them out of there. Okay? So President Roosevelt believed that if the Allies gave Germany time to dig in Europe, it would be impossible to defeat. And the first priority for the Allies was to stop Hitler from increasing the territory that his army already controlled. Now, this is probably a stupid comparison, but you guys are selling raffle tickets and you're making money. And I'm the guy that doesn't want to see you do that. And so the more I let you get dug in here, and the more that your teacher talks to you about fundraising and hands you these tickets and puts you on the road, the faster you're going to sell and make money, right? Well, I'm the opposer. I don't want you to do that, so I want to hit you before you dig in. So how do I keep you from getting these tickets and getting the speech I give you and getting out the door and selling them? How do I do that? I bomb you into submission. And that's what Roosevelt did, is he ordered around-the-clock bombing of German cities. Just like I would come in here and disrupt you somehow by, taking your tickets and throwing them over there, or hiding them, or not taking all your pencils.